Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Oliver and welcome to the first of its kind. This is Sears on the Sofa, and I have a special guest today with me, Lydia Ogie. Lydia is from the Wokingham branch, and today we will be discussing a number of factors around the property market, get some good engagement to what's actually going on out there, and it would be very interesting to hear it from the ground and for those who are on the front line. So hopefully you find today very interesting. Please subscribe, and any comments below we'll love to answer to yourself. So Lydia, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, thanks Oliver. How are you?
I'm doing not too bad in the slightest. How do you feel about sort of the first Sears sofa event?
Excited actually, bit nervous, but no, I think we're about to have a really good conversation.
Good, well, hopefully so. So I think, look, let's not beat around the bush. Let's crack straight on into it. So I think it's worthwhile having these conversations so we can obviously educate our audience out there. And I think one thing would be really interesting to know, particularly for those who are coming to the market so they have a greater understanding, is what are the buyers doing out there? You know, how are they currently thinking? How are they currently sort of making offers and negotiating with properties? You know, how is that mindset now for the buyers and the activity that you see on your day to day?
I think the biggest mindset that I've been noticing more so is about how buyers are valuing property at the moment. And I think what's been more evident is buyers aren't taking into consideration what the property was bought for. They're not taking into consideration what the seller has done since the property was bought and the investments they may have made. What they're able to do is look at the journey of the market, assess it themselves, and come to us with well-educated offers that have been very well considered and very well financially driven with what else is currently on the market and how the competition's running at the moment. So,
and I think, you know, we touched on this a little bit earlier, and, you know, one thing we spoke about as well, and it's quite recognisable that the buyers out there, you know, there is definitely a different approach to making these offers. Also, I think there's that general sort of conscious awareness that the world's an expensive place now. You know, the cost of living that is spoken about all the time, whether it's petrol, whether it's electricity bills, whether it's food, obviously the inflation circumstance. So it's not as straightforward as in a sense of, okay, well, they bought it at this in 2022, this must be worth X amount in 2024. Now there's a lot more choice on the market. It's a case of, right, okay, so I've seen that, I weighed it up, does that give me more, does it give me less? And also the factor that they have lifestyles to look after as well. And I think that's where you're starting to see a different calculation take place when it comes to negotiation. And I think also, in truth, a more astute, intelligent market, because they have sold prices, right move activity, data, and all that jazz. Second question. So, given advice out there, what would you say is the biggest misconception people have about today's market?
I think for me, it's definitely the general discussion behind mortgage rates, and that mortgage rates are really high and they're the highest that we've seen for a while. But I think the reality of it is, you know, I wasn't present or in the industry back in the pre-market crash, when we were seeing mortgage rates, you know, triple times the rate that we're currently seeing as an average at the moment. I think what's happened is we've come out of some incredibly low interest rates, 1%, 2%, and started entering into where we're now seeing averages at about 5%. Mm-hmm. And that's where that jump alone has caused a lot of concern for people when it comes to making those financial commitments. But when we actually look at the journey of the financial world, what's happening with the Bank of England base rate, and the positive conversations surrounding that with looking like it's not going to change or go up, mm-hmm. that alone is positive, because the rates at the moment are far more stable in comparison to those many years ago that they were.
So before 2008, when I bought my first house in 2006, and I was a first-time buyer, and I had a deal from Santander at 5.35%, like, I was buzzing. You know, that was an amazing deal. Now, if that deal transpires in today's market, everyone's going, oh my God, that's massive. So the truth of it is, if we're vouching on the basis that we're going to see those low interest rates return, we're not. You know, we're not going to see it in our lifetime again. It was the first time the financial sector did it in record history to lower those Bank of interest rate and commissions to that level. So will they do it again if something really bad happened in the economy? Potentially they'll go lower, but they definitely won't be going as low. So I think people have to understand, you know, this is reality and it's set in. There may be marginal differences from time to time, but if people actually calculated that difference, you know, it's not a massive difference. It's an extra £35 or £50 on your mortgage a month, or it's going to be, you know, less and be £35 less or £50 less. So the margins are incredibly small. The impact, what it does do is all those individuals who did secure a very low rate on their mortgages and are now going into the higher rates. So that's more where sort of the problem arises from. But I completely agree with you, Lydia. I think there's a massive misconception around actually these interest rates. A lot of the people buying houses now, they may have not known about those interest rates beforehand. And in truth, you know, in the lending world, it's still good rates that people are borrowing off. So very good points. Okay, so question number 3 that I have for yourself, Lydia. What is the best advice you could possibly give to anyone who is coming to the market in 2026?
My best advice is really allocate the time to think about the cost of moving and how much a financial commitment that's going to be for you before putting your property onto the market.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people can move into that process quite quickly with just the thought of putting my property on the market and seeing if it sells and what is my offer going to be and how can I make that work then moving forward. But there's actually a lot of layers behind the scenes with where you have to keep monies readily available as part of that process and it continues to move on. There's all of these hidden costs that come up that are never necessarily in the forefront of people's minds. And it's things like stamp duty, it's things like solicitors, removals, surveys, mortgage product costs.
Yeah.
And all of these fundings prior to going into that process, you have to allow strictly confirming where those are going to be, because entering into the market, it's a dynamic place at the moment and it's very deal orientated, which is where you can then start to see if you don't sell with where you're aspiring for at the current time of going into the market, what margin will that look like and how will that then impact what your onward plans are if you're especially moving up the market.
Yeah, and what would you, you know, if you're obviously out in the front line, one of the main valuers within the business, so if you are going then out to see a client at a property, you know, do you help the clients to understand sort of the flexibility they need to have around property acceptance and offers? Because obviously today's market, not so much figure, it's now deal orientated.
Yep.
And you walk them through the costs and do you help and guide them so that they have a very clear understanding of exactly how much things will cost along the process?
Yeah, definitely. Something incredibly important to me is to ensure that all conversations that I'm having is to discuss the full journey, not just the process of getting your property to the market, which is where we're professionals in. But I think what a lot of agents don't do is just really deep dive into the other areas that are so important to consider, and also managing expectations when it comes to actually entering into the marketplace.
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things for me is making sure that any seller that's thinking about coming to the market is in tune with what's happening, what approaches are being made, what's happening in the competitive market around their pricing range that we think will get the most amount of traction, and being very honest as well. I think,
Definitely.
you know, I would rather tell someone that they might not want to hear the right information rather than withhold that and tell them what they want to hear.
No, definitely, and I think good words of advice and approach there. And I think, yeah, look, you've heard it here, folks. So, you know, if you are coming to the market currently at the moment, get your financial ducks in a row. You've got to understand what it's going to cost, and in truth, you know, a lot of these things are going up as well. Also, a key thing is, and something that I would always advise, and something that I used to say back in the day, you know, you need to know your affordability and flexible ranges in what's on the market, and what you can afford to buy and what you're able to take. Because if you're in a circumstance by where you're just hunting down a particular figure, that's a really hard thing to actually obtain in today's markets. And to be fair, probably markets that are forecasted for the next sort of couple of years. So come forward open-minded. Importantly, come forward committed, understand your finances, and have an understanding that as much as we would love to obtain asking prices all the time, this is something that we can't control as agents, the market dictates. Have an understanding that, you know, people are negotiating at the moment, so it's that mental preparation for that as well.
Yeah, definitely agreed with you. And out of curiosity, Oliver, a question I have for you is, where do you think the market is seeing the most amount of activity at the moment?
Most certainly it is in that 3-bedroom stroke 4-bedroom family market range. Two reasons for that. is there's a lot of motivation for those who are starting their family to move into that family home.
Yeah.
And interestingly as well, and if we're particularly talking about sort of the Wokingham area, but in truth applies to the Bracknell area as well. In truth, a lot of first-time buyers have a really healthy budget as well. So typically where first-time buyers would buy apartments, and that would be the classic property that they buy, what you're finding now is they're actually leapfrogging over them. One of the reasons probably why you see the apartment activity to what it is, but also, you know, their budgets for first-time buyers. You know, some of them have £500,000 budgets. We only heard one earlier today where they had an £800,000 budget.
Yeah.
So, you know, those budgets, and also interestingly, first-time buyers, the average first-time buyer now is around 36, 37 years old. So it's a lot older as well. So they have a lot more time to save up, and they're a little bit more sort of choicey. So they're definitely calculating, well, there's no point buying a smaller home because I'm going to have a family. So they're already planning ahead in advance. And that's just coming back to more the intelligence that is applied to the open market as well. So I think having that double-edged sword is creating that high demand for those style of properties. Would you agree?
Yeah, no.
Good.
I would.
Thank you very much for your time. So that's a wrap now. So
Yeah.
we're going to continue to do this. So this is called Sears on the Sofa. And every week we're going to have a different individual coming along from the business. It can be from negs, it can be from transaction, it could be managers. And we're going to have some fun, light-hearted questions. Get to know us as agents. It's very important that you connect with us within the business, because there's a lot of people within the business who will go to great lengths to sell your property and to find you property. So a good engagement would be great. So if you do have any comments or questions that you'd like to throw at us, we'll be more than happy to ask. Please like us and subscribe to us. And from both Lydia and myself, thank you very much, and we will see you next time.